Today I'm going to show you how to make a bipedal character have an IK-FK switch for each limb. Each switch is going to be located on the shoulder or thigh bone of the corresponding limb. And all you have to do is flip the 0 to a 1 to be able to change the control of it. And yes, of course, the switch itself can be animated. I'm going to assume before starting that the character is fully rigged and weight painted. That's not going to be part of this tutorial, so just make sure that everything is working already. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and review the arms and the legs to make sure there's enough of a bend in them. If they're a little too straight, the IK won't behave properly. And I'm noticing right here with the arms, they are a little too straight. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is select both of these ball joints here and turn the mirroring tool on. And if I press Shift and Control, there we go. And then if I slide it along Y just a little bit, we need just a little bit of a bend. I might slide this up along Z just a little bit too. And perfect. Just a little bit of a bend. That's going to help our IK when we get to it later. As for the legs, they're in a little bit of a tricky spot here. This is a very stylized character, which makes him kind of hard to pin the bones just right, but I'm going to go ahead and adjust these like I did before. Again, making sure the mirroring tool is on. I'm going to select the top one and we're going to slide it a bit forward so it sits more directly on top of the foot. We're also going to specifically drag the foot backwards, selecting both of those ball joints like so. Yep, that's looking pretty good, I would say. And again, we don't want an extreme bend at the knees, so we're going to take this bend back just a little bit now that I have those selected and try and get that straight. Not too straight, but yeah, right about there. That's going to be perfect. All right, boring cleanup is over. Let's get on with the tutorial. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the bones on the left side of his body, like so. And then I'm going to press Shift D, and we're going to move them around a little bit, just make sure we got everything selected. These are going to become our FK target bones. So go ahead and right click, and we're going to press Control F2, make sure we are set on bones, not object, not anything else. And we're going to rename this twice. So the first time it's going to be _R.001. We're going to rename that to _FK_R. The reason that we have the R at the very end is because that's how the symmetry tool works. It detects the very last character here. If we press OK, we look in our hierarchy, we can press numpad period to be able to double check here. Yep, everything looks good. We're going to do that one more time, but we're going to do that for L. So I'm going to just change that to L and perfect. So now we have our FK bone set up. Now, before we create our IK bones, we're first going to turn off deformation on the FK bones we just created. You press Alt-W and then choose Deform, and that's going to turn them off, because the only bones that are actually going to be deformed are the base ones that we started with. Now, to create our IK bones, we're going to go ahead and make sure that our FK bones are first selected, and after we have that, we're going to press Shift-D once again to be able to duplicate them, and we're going to start to rename these. So just like before, we're going to follow this renaming pattern. We're going to start with the right bones, and then we'll do the left bones, and we're done. Okay, now we're going to create our IK controls for our hands and our feet. We're going to start by selecting the left forearm. We're going to zoom in here to have some context, and then I'm going to press E to extrude, and we're going to extrude along Y, and we're going to extrude it forward like so. Then we're going to do a similar thing with the feet here, except it's going to go backwards this time. So we're going to select our calf, that is L, and once we have that selected, we're going to press E to extrude backwards, like so. Next, we're going to set up those IK joints. Let's first start by turning off deformation on these bones, just to be sure, because that's not going to be necessary here. Next, I'm going to rename these bones so they're easier to keep track of. I'm going to press Control F2. I'm going to make sure all is selected, so this includes bones that I don't currently have selected. I'm going to do _L.001 and then _target_IK_L to replace the left side bones. You can see we renamed 2 at the bottom there. Then we're going to flip this to the right side and rename the other 2. And now we have them all renamed. Next, we're going to fix the parents of these new IK target bones that we created. We're going to start by selecting them and pressing Alt-P to clear their parents. Then we're going to locate the real hand and feet IK bones and make those children of the IK targets. Then we can finally set up those IK constraints for the arms. I'm going to start by selecting the target bone here, and then I'm going to select the forearm underscore IK underscore L, switch over to pose mode, and then press Control-Shift-C to create an inverse kinematic constraint. And I'm going to set the chain length to 2, and you can see that right away it works. Next, really quickly, I'm going to do that for each of the other limbs. And of course, we're going to do the same thing with the feet. And now we have all 4 limbs set up with IK. I'm going to make one more quick adjustment to the legs because I'm noticing that the bones are not straight over top of each other from this front perspective. So I just used a simple box select with the X-ray on, and I'm going to straighten that out like so. Next, we're going to have to create 24 copy transform constraints. So in order to do this, we're going to have to do a lot of work in the outliner over here. So you might want to give yourself some more space. I'm going to start by showing you how to do this with just the arm, and you can copy the process for the rest of the limbs. Select upper arm IK and then select upper arm deform. Make sure you're in pose mode and then press Control-Shift-C and choose copy transforms. This is going to be the first of many that we're going to be doing. Next, choose forearm IKL and then forearm deformation L, and then same thing, Control-Shift-C, copy transforms. Last time, we're going to go ahead and select the hand IKL, and then we're going to select the hand deformation L, Control-Shift-C, and then copy transforms. That's it for the IK bones. Now we have to do it for the FK bones. Grab your upper arm FKL and then your upper arm deformation L, and then choose Control-Shift-C to copy transforms. And then we're going to do forearm FKL and then forearm deformation L, copy transforms. And last one, hand FKL and hand deformation L, Control-Shift-C. Great, that's one of 4 limbs done. So now I'm going to run through the rest of the limbs really quickly. Okay, and once that's all said and done, all of the deformation bones should now have 2 constraints each. Each should be pairing to the relative IK bone and FK bone accordingly. Wouldn't hurt to just scroll through and just make sure that they all match up on all 4 of the limbs. Okay, so now we're going to generate those properties for the IK-FK sliders for the shoulders and the thighs. Let's start with the shoulders. I'm going to select one shoulder here and create a new custom property. And I'm going to edit that, change that name to IK-FK, make that library overridable. And I'm going to do that for the others. Now we have our property set up. These properties are available to us whenever we have the bone selected in this little drop down right here. Before we get to setting up the drivers, let's first start by creating some pull targets for all the IK constraints that we made. I'm going to switch back to edit mode, and then I'm going to select my upper arm L deformation bone, and then I'm going to select my thigh L deformation bone and press E and Y to start creating these bones. Now, as for the thigh bones, we actually want them to be in the opposite direction, so I'm going to quickly fix that. And then for the new bones that we created, we're going to want to clear those parents, so we're going to press Alt-P. And then for each of these, we are going to slide them and give them a little bit of space in the relative directions. Like so. In pose mode, we're going to go ahead and assign these pull targets on each of the constraints. So when I select my forearm IK bone here where there's a pull target, I'm going to target the armature itself, and then for the bone, it's going to be the bone that we just created. And as you can see here, the pull arm is definitely working. You might have to apply a little bit of rotation so that it makes sense. So in this setup, I'm finding about 170 degrees on the left arm is about right. And I'm going to go ahead and run through the rest of the limbs. All right, once you have those all set up, the pull targets for each limb should hopefully be working for you. And if you haven't already, now is not a bad time to rename those new bones that you made. We're going to use a similar naming scheme as the target bones from last time, but this time we're going to call them pulls. and that will keep them separated. Okay, it's driver time. Go ahead and select your upper arm deformation L, and then we're going to go to the influence, right click, add driver, open in the driver editor. We're going to need to copy that data path from one of the properties we made. So I'm going to select the shoulder and right click on that data path and choose copy data path. Then we're going to jump back to our deformation L. And then once we select it again, make sure it's on single property and averaged values. And then for the actual reference here, it's just going to be the armature, which is nice and straightforward. And then we're going to paste that data path in the field right here. Next, we're going to copy this driver, and then we're going to paste it on this field down here. Now, with the way this is set up, our IK is what we declared first, so that is going to need to be inverted. We're going to select the red line here, make sure we hide the yellow, A to select everything, S, Y, -1 to flip it, and then we have the beginnings of our setup. From here, it's actually pretty straightforward. We can close out of this window and then copy these drivers one by one to the child bones. Now, if we go ahead and do a quick test here, we can see that right now the IK on this side is not functioning. But if I go ahead and grab the FK, you can see that it is being affected, like so. And if we go to our slider and we switch it to IK mode and we grab our control, then suddenly our IK is in control, as you would expect. Now let's repeat the process for the remaining 3 limbs. If you copied all the drivers correctly and you followed all the steps, you should have 4 complete IK-FK switches. So you can see at the bottom here, the legs are currently set to FK, but if I set them to IK, then now they are in IK control, and then same thing with the arms, of course. So now that it's all functional, let's make it usable. Okay, so now I'm going to create 4 basic primitives for our rig. I'm going to start by creating a single arrow, leave it at default, and then I'm going to create a sphere and leave that at default, and then I'm also going to create a circle and leave that at default. I'm going to create one final shape here. It can just be a sphere. The actual type doesn't matter. And I'm going to change that one to be 0 radius. So it's basically invisible. That one we're going to call nothing. The circle we're just going to call circle. The wire sphere we will just call wire sphere. And then finally, the arrow will just be called arrow. For all these shapes, we're just going to go ahead and resize them to be 0.01. That's going to make them pretty small, but that size is going to be easier to work with once we assign it to the rig. Speaking of the rig, why don't we set up those shapes? I'm going to select my armature, go back into pose mode, and let's start with the pull targets. So I'm going to select all 4 pull targets, and I'm going to go over to the bone tab over here. We're going to go to viewport display and unfold that. Go to custom shape, and then we are going to pick our wire sphere. Now, we can choose all of them at once if we hold Alt and then select wire sphere as we let go as well. And then they are all set to our shape. I want to change the colors while we're here, so I'm going to hold Alt and choose red for both of these categories here. And I'm not too happy with the scale either. I think it's a little bit larger than what I want. I think about half that size would be good. So I'm going to hold Alt over here and then type 0.5 and also hold Alt as I release. And you can see that the scale is also updated as we would like. There, that'll work. Next, let's handle those pesky deformation bones. We're never going to be animating them directly anymore, so we might as well just hide them. I'm going to go ahead and find all of our deformation bones. Now that I have them all selected, when it comes to the custom object, I'm going to hold Alt and we're going to choose nothing, and that will make sure that they are always invisible. Okay, perfect. Let's set our IK bones to use those arrows that we created. First, let's select the IK bones. Once those are selected, we're going to hold Alt and make sure we choose our arrow. And just like that, we have our arrow set up. These arrows usually require a little bit more correction to get just right. I'm going to go ahead and play with these numbers a little bit. It looks like the magic number in this instance was negative 90 degrees on X. And just like the pole targets, I'm going to assign a yellow color to these, as that's what makes sense to me. Great. Okay, let's set up our circle targets now. I'm going to select all 4 of our target bones. And then I'm going to choose the circle target and hold Alt and get them set up. Now, they aren't going to be facing the right orientation right away, so we have to find the right orientation for these. So after a little finesse and playing around, I finally have the hand and feet targets in places that I like, so I'm just going to go ahead and change the colors. And lastly, we're going to select those old hand and foot IK bones, and we're going to hide them by setting their custom shape to nothing. If you made it this far, then you should have a rig with 4 IK FK switches for all of the limbs.